Today we're going to be looking at the next lesson in our series on feudalism. This one is titled Feudal Obligations. The most essential thing for us to know within a discussion of feudal obligations is the most central relationship within feudalism. That is the one between lords and their vassals. This is the most important relationship, and understanding this helps us to break down the entire feudal system. Within this relationship, a vassal is somebody who is given land to hold. And in exchange for holding this land, they promise to provide a service to those who give them that land. So it's land in exchange for a service. And it is the most basic of all of our feudal relationships. Now, the land holding itself. Once a vassal receives the land, it's pretty much theirs to use as they believe is most effective, kind of like a business. Now, they will generally structure it in a similar way. They have a manor house. This is the Lord's house, a place where the Lord is going to live. And then the lands and villages and whatnot that are connected to that central authority. The vassal can be a noble, can be a knight, and they're going to subdivide their land even further. So generally, a king would give land to major nobles who hold large areas of land. And then these guys subdivide their land further and give this to minor lords or knights. Again, in exchange for this same lord-vassal relationship. In this case, the lord is a lord rather than a king. But, it can be a duke or a count or a baron, one of those other ones. And they have their own vassals. Now, the relationship here is the exact same as it would be between, say, a duke and a king. I give you land, you give me a service in return. That is how this functions. Now, wealth and income within feudal Europe. Within feudal Europe, almost all of it comes from the same thing. Almost all of it comes from agriculture. Feudal Europe is not doing much else. This is not an advanced economy. In fact, it has taken many steps back since the Roman times and even since the Carolingian times in terms of trading with other parts of the world. They really have become very isolated, so wealth is not purely, but almost purely agriculture. So that means it is coming from the very bottom. You have your serfs, your peasants. They are going to raise crops and animals on this land that's owned by our lesser lords and our knights. They're going to be working down in these fields, getting crops and whatnot for the lesser lords and knights. Then they pay a portion of their crops or their animals as their form of rent to the knight. The knight is then receiving more food and whatnot than he could consume, pays a big portion of that up to his lord as his rent, and it goes on up the chain just like that. So obligations, rent, and tax. So everybody's going to owe something to somebody else. The serfs owe rent to knights and lesser lords. Okay, they live on the land, they work the land, they produce all the food, and a chunk of it goes up to the lesser lords or the knights. And then these lesser lords and knights owe they owe tax, they owe rent, which is going to be a food rent. Okay, going to be giving more food up to the greater lords, and also providing them with military service. And then the greater lords are going to owe taxes. Again, this tends to wind up being food, just because this is the currency of the time, but here we're also getting into currency, up to the kings. Now, the kings are going to take all this money and all this food, and largely they're going to use it to either pay out bribes, give gifts, or to feed and pay an army. Feeding and paying the army is going to be necessary for holding this entire nation together. So we have a feudal system that begins with our serfs at the bottom, works our way up to our knights, through our nobility, and up to the king. Now, protection works in a similar way, but it goes down through the list. In terms of protection, we begin with the kings, who have to protect their vassals. They protect their vassals by raising these huge, big armies, because if you're going to defend a large kingdom like, say, France, you need to have a large army to do so. But the king is not going to be in direct control of all of that. So we have the greater lords who are protecting their lesser lords. So if it's a smaller threat, we don't need the king to call in a national army. The greater lords can muster together enough men to protect themselves from a small threat. It's just the big ones that require the king's assistance. And then all the way down to our knights, whose primary function is, again, to protect and keep the peace within their small sliver of this feudal system. Only when they are threatened by something much greater would they go to their lord and say, hey, I need help. This is something bigger than just what I can handle. So that is feudal obligations of protection. Now, when we look at that big, huge feudal army, kind of like this one over here, okay, that is a big army. And fielding something like that is beyond the reach of a knight or even a greater lord. You would need a king to pull together that number of men. And this is why we have feudalism. If you can pull together all these individuals and get them all together into one massive army, then you can repel just about anything other than another massive army. So the only people that can compete with you are those that have this same type of feudal structure. Kings, when they go to war, are going to call on their vassals to meet their obligations. Those vassals are going to call on their vassals to meet their obligations. And pretty soon we have knights pulling all their serfs off the farms, giving them weapons, and saying, let's go fight. Well, I shouldn't say giving them weapons. At this time, farmers largely, although not exclusively, would use their farming tools as their weapons or modify them in some way. So back at this time, really, feudal armies are mostly made out of farmers, not trained warriors, so people who do not know how to fight. Just being said, there's the enemy, go get them. And that was feudal warfare. Also important to know about feudal warfare is that it only takes place between the spring planting and the fall harvest, because these are farmers. And the whole feudal system breaks down if we don't have rents being paid, and rents are paid in food. So if the serfs aren't back on their farms by harvest, nobody gets paid, everybody starves, it's a bad time. So feudal warfare really does just take place during those summer months. That's it on feudalism for today and our system of obligations. Hope you found something here interesting, and I'll see you next time. See ya.